Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. Tonight's features will feel the wrath of generations of Trekkers. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have two good films, the other two bad. Let the chaos begin. I am Adam Thomas.
And I am Dr. Thomas Mariani. That doctorate is not legally binding, however.
Yeah, at all. You just do shoddy work out of a van.
Do you need a new kidney? Live long and prosper, and long I mean 20 minutes maybe? Who knows?
Right.
But we have a special guest with us, a more experienced guest in the world of our subject for the evening, Star Trek, which we're doing in honor of Star Trek Discovery's coming back on the CBS All Access app for all 50 of you, maybe? I'll give it 50. I'll give him 50. Our guest is returning from our kid horror episode that we did a few months ago, Kaycee Jarrard. Kaycee, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and the correct term is Trekkie, you snob, you offensive, racist prick.
Full backstory is that we were going to do Star Trek as a topic, and I was like going through my friends list, like who is willing to talk that is actually a Trekker or a Trekkie, whichever, because that is so interchangeable to me. But I stumbled upon to Kaycee, and I love the fact that I messaged you, Kaycee, with like, hey, would you consider yourself a Star Trek fan? And you literally said you were watching an episode of Deep Space Nine when I asked you that.
I was not, actually. I was trying to come up with a snarky thing to respond, and then I got into a half-hour-long conversation with my sister. Because I told her about Trekkies and Trekkers, she assumed I was making that up.
Well, I know that is a thing, so which do you actually prefer, genuinely?
I prefer Trekker. That's my second choice. My first choice is Who Gives a Shit.
Good point as well, but
Yeah, I kind of agree with that.
Suffice to say, though, you are a bit more experienced, because Adam and I admit at the end of our last episode, we are more familiar with Star Trek through the films, but you are far more experienced with the television shows and everything else, correct?
I'm experienced with both because I've seen all the series except Enterprise most of the way through, and I've seen all the movies many, many times over. My favorite era of Star Trek is the first 6 original series movies. Yeah, you might be able to say I'm a real savic about it.
Oh, God.
What was your origin point for liking Star Trek, and what do you think makes it last, especially as long as it has now over 50 years at this point?
The origin point was that my dad was a fan of it, so I would watch random snippets of episodes while he was watching before I understood what a story was when I was that young. But I could look and see, oh, this is Star Trek. They're in space. That was cool. Then in high school, my parents were both saying I would probably really like it, and I found that TV Land played the original series at 6 a.m., and I would get up at 6 a.m. and watch an episode of the original series before I then got ready for school. And why it lasts is, well, very good storytelling. It's also very archetypal storytelling. To sound totally snobby, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are TV Shakespeare characters. They're a little bit basic, but they're very well performed, they're very well defined, and they are very easily molded into different dynamics that other shows and other series take.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with that, because I wasn't really a Star Trek fan growing up at all, because I was way more of a Star Wars kid. And whenever I did see episodes of, Next Generation or Star Trek, literally, as I described last week, I would watch them whenever they would appear in front of syndication when I was waiting for The Simpsons to come on as a kid. It would just be it's that show along with, Friends and Frasier. Next Generation especially was that show where it's just alright, The Simpsons isn't on yet, I'll watch this.
Must have blown your mind when Kelsey Grammer showed up at the end of that episode.
Oh yeah, when I found he was Sideshow Bob, it was just oh man, everything comes together. I didn't really get into Star Trek at all, actually, until the first J.J. Abrams movie. That was the first one that really got me at all interested in pursuing the other Star Trek movies, especially. And even though I'm not as familiar with the stuff in the show, still those characters are so iconic. Especially, I agree, the Kirk, Spock, and McCoy do feel like they're a resonating pop culture trio that you can really relate to any of like various different trios we've had in other films and television shows and all that. And you would agree with that, Adam, I suppose?
I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, but I started watching these when I was a kid as well, because my dad was also into it. But I didn't really follow the show. Thomas, I can't believe you haven't seen it until J.J. Abrams. Holy shit. Now I know why you wanted an expert on here.
No. Here's a hot take. I love that movie came out, because 1 week I was being made fun of by people whenever I would bring up Star Trek. Then it comes out, and a week afterwards, hey, can I borrow your Star Trek DVDs?
Right. It's like me with Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants.
Yes!
Same
understands.
thing. I agree with Casey. The original 6, well, the original.
They are
4 out of the original 6.
They're all neat movies, even if only 4 of them are good. And another thing I really commend them for, they're 6 very different movies.
Yeah, no, they are all completely different in tone. But I also like the Next Generation movies for what they are. 1 out of the 3 Abrams movies I liked. It's kind of a jumbled order for me. And then, I had a couple of the toys, stuff like that. But no, I never really followed it. Like all the side characters other than the main crew, I have no idea who they are. Like there's people who know every member of Starfleet or whatever, and I have no idea. But again, apparently I know more than you, Thomas, for once.
Technically, one could say my first attachment to Star Trek in any way cinematically was probably being one of the few people who saw Galaxy Quest in the theater.
Oh, God, what a good movie.
That's the thing.
I still haven't seen it.
What
Netflix
the fuck?
Netflix
Why the fuck
constantly
is this
tells
guy
me,
on? You said he was on because he was watching Deep Space Nine, and his first words are, I wasn't, I was lying. You got a fucking flim-flam man on the show.
No, Netflix always tells me, hey, you should really watch Galaxy Quest. And I say, I'll get to it eventually, Netflix.
I mean, admittingly, I could see it if, they're like, hey, you should watch Galaxy Quest, and it's just a big picture of Tim Allen's head. I could get the hesitation.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's get into our specific films that we're talking about for the evening, which, at the end of our last episode, we did our pick-in numbers between 1 through 10 of our 2 different picks, and ended up getting our good feature, which is Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, which came out in 1982, and Star Trek Generations is our bad pick. But we'll get into the good one first. So, first off, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan.
Somewhere in the darkest reaches of the universe, a battle is about to begin. A battle between good and evil, between a warrior and a madman. A battle that will take you from the end of time to the beginning of creation. A battle between the awesome power of the Starship Enterprise and the Wrath of Khan. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Rated PG.
Now showing at a theater near you.
Or as to call it, fake chest piece.
That is a real chess.
No, it isn't.
Montalban has very much argued in the past that it is his real chest, but that's...
And the director has also stood by it. That's the thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, so 2 guys out of 100.
And the crew?
Oh, it's not real. There's no fucking I don't care.
Well, enough of this deep state chess talking. So Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, we should point out that obviously this is the second of the features that were done with the original series cast. And notably, this is coming off of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which came out in 1979, and was, despite being a huge success, very much dogged upon because, correct me if I'm wrong, Casey, with any of this history, but that came out about a decade or so after the original series ended, but there was a renewed interest because of in syndication. Star Trek, the series, the original series, was all over the place, and so there was this renewed interest, sort of a nostalgic throwback, interestingly enough, at that time for the motion picture to come out and be made. And everyone was so hyped for it in the winter of 1979. And it's a long, very 2001: A Space Odyssey-esque kind of boring sci-fi movie that most people were like, what the fuck is this? This is boring. And that was a lot because of Gene Roddenberry and his influence. And so now when they were still able to make enough money to do a sequel, they're like, hey, Gene, get the fuck out of here. And they got Harve Bennett, who wasn't that familiar with Star Trek at all and had to like marathon through the original series, but was very interested in the episode Space Seed, which featured Ricardo Montalban as the character of Khan Noonien Singh, which I hadn't seen that episode before doing this recording. I watched it right before I watched Wrath of Khan. And you can tell why, because that character is like a very memorable villain in terms of like how he fought against Kirk and all that, even though he's defeated with literally like Kirk pulls out a fucking cardboard tube from the control panel and beats him up. It's a lot of great build up, and then it's just like a very weird fist fight with a cardboard tube.
I'll have you know, William Shatner's stunt double gave it his all, man.
I mean, yeah, I just love the fact that Khan says, "Oh, I am 500 times your strength," and then cardboard soup, "Oh, no! Oh, I'm down for the count." Was that history lesson accurate, Casey?
More or less, you're missing another one of the big influences in that in 1977, a little movie came out that did moderately well called Star Wars, and as a result, there were a bunch of people who said, hey, we think we can make our own Star series and space and sci-fi stuff. And so I think part of the problem with the motion picture is it's trying to be both. It wants to be Star Wars. It also wants to be 2001: Space Odyssey. And those are not two flavors that blend easily.
It's not chocolate and peanut butter by any stretch, no.
No, it is not. It's chocolate and
poop.
Don't talk about Star Wars that way. It's better than poop.
Well, no, I'm just comparing.
Also, are you implying that poop is a flavor that you enjoy on its own?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
A good guano sandwich.
But that's more or less it. And like, what's interesting is the motion pictures directed by you and I, Tom, are very big fans of this director. Robert Wise, who did The Day the Earth Stood Still, he did The Haunting, and he definitely made a movie. It's interesting, but also it's the most interesting, boring movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, that's the thing. I really like the idea of especially sort of the verger thing that becomes sort of the main subject of the movie, especially like the halfway point. I find that idea fascinating. I just wish we didn't have as many like fucking glory shots of the USS Enterprise. Like, how long is that sequence where Kirk's just like, oh look, it's the Enterprise again, and they're looking at it and it's like, yep, there's that side of the Enterprise and this side of it, and then here's the top, and then here's this. They just were really proud of that fucking model.
And what I love about that is every single shot of the Enterprise in this movie until it goes to warp is just a reused shot from the motion picture.
That is true, but then you had to edit it down. They had a better editor.
Yeah, they did. Like, you can't really notice it because they only used 5 of the Lord knows how many shots.
And this one was directed by Nicholas Mayer, who had some history with, he was an Academy Award-nominated screenwriter before this. He made a movie I would recommend that's very underappreciated called Time After Time, which features, yes, Malcolm McDowell as H.G. Wells going after David Warner as Jack the Ripper into then modern 1979. It's really fun. It's a really good, enjoyable little time travel movie. And he kind of took the reins here and would continue to give some, at least, like, screenwriting stuff for the later movies. Directed the 6th one as well, and was recently a consultant on at least the first season of Discovery. And he put a lot of lifeblood back into the franchise.
I honestly don't think, if they would have gone another route with these films, I don't know that they would have had much success. If they would have gone the Gene Roddenberry route, maybe again for the second one, like giving them another crack at it, I don't know that we would have as many as we do now. It's just, this one just amps everything up from the first one, to 11. And this is basically an extended, bigger budget episode of the show. And, I mean, you got such a dynamic villain too. So, I mean, that always helps. It's not just whatever the fuck was in the first one. You got an actual tangible villain in this one. Quite awesome, if I do say so.
What I like about Khan is, as a villain, he's not really all that successful. He successfully tricks Kirk once, then every single move that he makes for the rest of the movie is him getting duped. But the thing is, he's such a persistent villain. It doesn't matter that he's literally about to die. He will still be trying to kill you.
No, he's like, Captain Ahab.
He does not live to see Kirk win. He dies as right before the ship explodes, before he gets a chance to see Kirk get away. He dies thinking he won. That is Khan.
And then they do the one with Eggs Benedict cucumber patch and just ruin the whole damn thing.
Which Which gets into, oh my god, I hate the way Khan has been portrayed and advertised post this movie. Because I watched it with someone who had never seen this movie, and he only knew Khan as this legendary bad guy. And that's what surprised him so much with how ineffective he was most of the time. Khan almost wasn't a bad guy. Like, had he not tried to steal Kirk's ship, or had Ceti Alpha 5 or Ceti Alpha 6 not blown up, then he would have gone there, he would have ran a little tiny dictatorship on a planet in the middle of nowhere, and he would have been not even necessarily a friend, but he would have just been someone out there, someone who wished no ill will towards Kirk. But things did not work out that well, and he wanted revenge.
Right, yeah, what I really like is the fact that Khan is less of like an actual imposing force as much as he is just like an albatross to remind Kirk of his past sins.
Mm-hmm.
You get totally why he would want to go against Kirk in this way, but it feels all from a sense of somewhere where you can relate to, because it's like, yeah, his wife died, and he's just been marooned on this planet with all these other people, and he's just a completely diminished cult leader, basically. But he does have affection for the people, his followers that are around him, and also he is still he's like you said, he's very persistent, and he has so much energy in him. I think that's what Burkhard Montalban really brings to the part, is just he has so much fascination and energy out of this rage that he has. And obviously there's so many great lines that he says, like Klingon proverb, all that. My favorite is the bit where he actually sees the Enterprise. He says, "There she is. Yeah. There she is." That's my favorite line, because he's just that infatuated with finally seeing the ship again after so long. I just that's what really he brings, and I think that's what really works, is despite how ineffective he is still just very effective at pushing himself in Kirk's face and reminding Kirk of what he's done in the past, which works perfectly for Kirk's arc, which is going from this promoted standpoint, wanting to go back into the field, wanting to be a starship captain again.
Yeah, plus if without this movie, we would have never got Khan!
Hot take, that is not the best ham line in this movie.
No.
Nothing gets close to, "This is Ceti Alpha 5." After he says, "This is Ceti Alpha 5," he just gets down to barely above a whisper and starts talking about how Ceti Alpha 6 exploded. And it's such a chilling moment to see his mood change.
Yeah, with that, and then, "From the bowels of hell, I stabbeth thee." You're like, yes.
"I've done far worse than kill you. I've hurt you, and I wish to go on hurting you."
And then it's like, when he says, "left you marooned, barely alive," then he has to do his own echo, "barely alive." That's the thing, is that there's a patheticness to Khan that at the same time you are kind of endeared by the fact that he doesn't see that patheticness at all. He is so gung-ho that he doesn't see that, nope, despite these not working, I am doing the best thing because fuck this guy. He's just so seething with revenge that he's after this. It's such a great performance. I do agree, while being, I would argue, the best Star Trek movie, it also might be the worst thing to happen to Star Trek movies in terms of how many of them try to have a Khan-style character afterward, but they take all the wrong lessons that you're talking about. There's even Eric Bana in the first Star Trek reboot, or
so over the top.
Or you mentioned Benedict Cumberbatch, or even earlier than that, you had Nemesis had that problem. I would argue
or
as well.
Or Malcolm McDowell.
We'll get to that in a bit.
No, I think, honestly, out of all the original movies, you got Khan, you got, I can't remember his name, Christopher Lloyd in Search for Spock was awesome. And then Christopher Plummer in Part 6 as Admiral Chang was awesome. Other than that, they're all forgettable. They're all just cookie cutter.
Well, a lot of them straight up don't have villains. There's no villain in Star Trek 4. Well, I guess 5 has Sybok, but that's a whole other movie that we could have talked about. So row your boat.
Oh, God.
What does God need with a starship? That's amazing, though. That bit is that movie's worth it for that scene.
That movie is watchable.
But anyway, getting back off track. So yeah, this is the best Star Trek movie, right? Do we agree on that? It's the best of any of the Star Trek movies?
I think so.
Very much so. When I sat down to watch it, I was afraid that this would be the moment I watched it one time too many, and I would no longer be able to see the wonder of it. I would just get caught up on, okay, this set doesn't look great, or this costume doesn't work, or that take was a bad take, they should have gone with another one. That happens when you see a movie enough times. It happened to me with Empire Strikes Back. It's going to be a couple of years before I can watch that again. I was afraid this would be that for me. And 10 minutes in, I realized it wasn't. 2 hours in, I realized I had a problem because I sat down to take notes to do this, and I got too caught up in the movie that I forgot to take notes.
You're right, though, about certain things. About sometimes the costumes don't hold up or the sets don't hold up. But I think that just adds the charm of it because it reminds you of the TV show. You know, it reminds you of the source material it comes from, unlike a Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back, where it really doesn't have any pre-existing source material. I always have that fear with certain movies, too. But this is probably one, if not the only Star Trek movie that I can watch kind of repeatedly and not get bored with it. The rest of them kind of like, I'm good.
The reason that it sticks out in so many people's minds, especially in like non-Star Trek fans, I think, is because it sticks so perfectly well on its own, really. Because you don't really need the first one, obviously, because it doesn't have much of anything to do with the motion picture. But even if you don't have that much knowledge of Star Trek, you can still latch on to just the story about Captain James T. Kirk is a former Starfleet captain who is promoted out of it, but then wants to go back in the field. He's feeling like he's starting to get into his older years and doesn't want to do that anymore. And his relationship with his friends, with McCoy and Spock and the other crew members that come into it, you feel that camaraderie even if you don't really know the backstory of these characters at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think, as far as like this one and part 3, I feel are almost perfect companion pieces. Like, I think the transition between 2 and 3 is done pretty well. Although Scotty probably should have just gone in there. Like, he is the engineering officer.
Well, the idea was that he would have died before he could get the job done. As Spock is not human, he would live long.
He was wearing a spacesuit. I don't know. I don't know.
That spacesuit doesn't have a helmet. And most of the radiation...
I'm sure there's a fucking helmet somewhere on the spaceship.
Well, why didn't they grab the oxygen mask if they would have helmets?
All right, I'm captaining this starship, and I'm telling everybody to calm the fuck down on the bridge. To say that despite that, you know, the question you might have of like, oh, hey, some of the logical stuff, when you're really swept up in the moment of it, you don't really give a shit of like all the shit's going down. And I think it works because, you know, with Spock as a character, he's obviously so matter of fact about all this stuff that's going on that when he sees this opportunity, he isn't going to hesitate like a Scotty would or like a McCoy even does at a certain point. And I love that they do have that recurring light racism that's going on with McCoy, just constantly questioning like, you fucking Vulcan piece of shit doing the blah blah blah, and how you know, he says, no, I'm not going to let you fucking do this, dude. You can't go in there, you're going to die. And he's like, well, as you keep saying, I'm Vulcan, so I can last a bit longer in there. And that moment really resonates, I think, because it's like we mentioned, even if you're not too familiar with the original series, you are aware of Spock as like a cultural icon of a character. And seeing him die in the selfless act and going in there, and especially how violent it is when like that blue flame comes up and he goes in there. And then the actual makeup where like he looks like he's like in Chernobyl or something dying there.
His voice and everything too.
What gets me is when he's following the sound of Kirk's voice to go and meet him, and he runs into glass because he can't see anymore. That's the part that always gets me.
Yes, yeah. That really hurts. This detail I didn't notice really until this watch was when he gets up, he still has like the common courtesy to like fix his shirt.
Yeah,
Kirk.
Yep.
I want to stand at attention, and yeah, it's... Oh, God. This always bummed me out when I was a kid, hard. Mm-hmm. Like, real hard. And the thing is, Thomas, I like what you were saying, like, earlier, even if you don't really have any knowledge of the show, period, and if you watch this movie for your first time, and this is the first time you've seen any of these characters, you would still 100% feel the weight of this moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's done so well. And, yeah, you know, I never noticed it either, Thomas, really, until this time as well, when he stands up and he, you know, makes sure his shirt's straight and down. And you're like, oh, this fucking... Oh, you pointy-eared bastard.
Well, and especially how, like, earlier on you get a true sense where, like I said, even if you're not familiar, you get a sense of, like, the relationship between him and Kirk, where Spock has become the captain de facto at this point of the Starship Enterprise, but the entire time he's like, I'll do it because, you know, it's my duty and my logic, but you know I'm not cut out for this as well as you are. You were always the better captain for this position. You always would be the one to do a better job. And that kind of goads Kirk into doing it a bit more. That's what works, is that you really feel the friendship between these two older men, and then when that happens, it just really, especially the moment where, like Scotty says, hey, Captain, you gotta come down here, and looks over at Spock's chair, and he's gone. He just immediately knows, like, oh, fuck. I know what he did. And he has to go down there. It does. It really resonates hard, despite not knowing, maybe a lot about what's going on previously in the franchise.
Let me ask you guys this with it. This only came up to me when I was watching this one. Do you think that when they were writing Saavik, they had the idea that if these movies go forward and Leonard Nimoy did not want to be involved, this can be the new Spock?
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel that 100%,
okay.
because they kept her going.
And there's a lot of scenes where they're kind of passing the torch between her and Spock, where he lets her pilot out. She goes on the away mission instead of him.
They do the little eyebrow raises to each other.
And admittingly, I think Kirstie Alley is pretty good in the part as well. I think that Saavik really works, especially like how Kirk notices, like, oh, the new hairdo and all that, and how she is very much like willing to speak a bit more candidly and actually still asking permission at the same time. I think there shows a rebellious spirit that's there, but at the same time, she's still wanting to, respect the chain of command. I do really like that. Obviously, with the Kobayashi Maru thing, that's such a great concept, and the fact that Kirk went around it, and then later on paid the price for not accomplishing the no-win scenario.
In the EU, the way he goes around it is he programs in Klingons to know and fear the name Captain Kirk.
Because I know we're talking about this movie, because we brought up part 3. Okay, I'll just ask. What is your guys' favorite quote from Star Trek, period? From the movies, from whatever. If you had to pick one, besides the obvious live long and prosper, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
There's an old Vulcan proverb, only Nixon can go to China. No, it's not that. It's probably one of Sisko's rants as a captain's log in Deep Space Nine, or it's one of the closing lines of Star Trek VI. For this one, it would be, of all the souls I've encountered in my travels, he was the most human.
That's such a good line. Wow, what a good. Yeah, that's a good call.
In fact, my senior quote in high school was, "I have been and always shall be your friend."
Fucking nerd.
That's why
I like in part 3 with Christopher Lloyd, where he's like, send these people back to the ship. No, but why? Because you wish it. Evil and mad Christopher Lloyd is my favorite. But no, I really like in this one the whole Moby Dick part at the end, where you just really get the idea that Khan just wants to see Kirk fail no matter the cost. Like he just out of pure hatred. And as we said earlier, I think the reason this one gets remembered so much is because of Khan. Honestly, I think that's a big, big part of it. Is because there's no other villain, really. I mean, how many more can you, by name, out of all the Star Trek movies, can you really name, besides Khan?
General Chang, Sybok.
Chang. Well, yeah, okay.
You.
All right, okay.
If you want to go into a series, there's Harry Mudd, the Borg Queen.
I would sincerely, I would probably say of the original series, I would agree it's probably Khan, and the closest would probably be the Borg Queen. The Borg, just as a concept, I think is the biggest lasting sort of enemies. Or Q. I guess, would you call Q a villain, though?
He started off
more of a trickster.
Yeah, I mean, he's
As Charlie Day would say, wild card, bitches.
You know what, yeah. Why did they never use Q in any of those Next Generation movies? I don't know. He would have been great to use as some kind of side villain in any of those
They threw
movies.
Robert Picardo in one or two of them.
Yeah, he was in First Contact, yeah, and it was what the fuck? What? But to get back to Khan, I will say, I think what also works is the fact that the other Star Trek villains, I think they had a problem with, they had to have some kind of actual hand-to-hand combat, which hand-to-hand combat in Star Trek in general is either
awful.
I mean, at best, it's endearingly cheesy. And to be fair, you mentioned Christopher Lloyd's Klingon character in 3. At least I do like the "I have had enough of you" that sequence. I think that's a fun fight. But I think what works is that with Khan doesn't necessarily need that. Khan is a lot more plotting, and the most physical thing he does is admittingly terrifying with the SETI eels. That's so terrifying. It's just we're gonna have these little eels crawl in painfully into your ear and make you susceptible to us basically puppeteering you, especially with with Walter Koenig, and then also Paul Winfield doesn't get enough credit. I think is a very good supporting player in this movie, especially when he has to like deal with the idea of like trying to kill Kirk and then sacrificing himself. Really good underrated performance in the movie too.
Yeah, he's the unsung hero of this movie.
But yeah, you would agree, Adam. Obviously, I think that's probably why he works so well.
Yeah, definitely. Like that's the thing too about Khan. You almost, when you get into his backstory, you kind of almost do have sympathy for him as well. He's a horrible, murdering bastard, but you kind of can see where he's coming from a little bit.
The mark of any great villain.
Right, exactly. And again, I think that's why Khan has stood the test of time. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons that they fucking shoehorned him into Darkness. Like, when people know Khan, let's give him Khan again, which we did not need. But, I mean, just because he's so iconic. So, I mean, iconic. I mean, oh, God.
You can see yourself out of the bridge now.
Yeah, all right, everybody. Tip your waitress. Try the veal, come back for the 8 o'clock show, gets a little blue. Everybody knows Khan. If you say Khan, people know who you're talking about. They know the villain you're talking about, for the most part. I mean, you might find, Choo Choo Charlie over here might not know who the hell it is, but...
Personally, when you say Khan, my first thought is of Khan, the villain from Octopussy, the Roger Moore 007 adventure.
Oh, my God. There's just no fucking pleasing you.
No.
From Hell's Heart, Adam stabs at thee.
Yep.
What I also like about this is the fact that they actually give all of the individual players in the sort of Star Trek crew something to do. There's some small thing they get to do, even if it's something as simple as Nichelle Nichols actually trying to contact Khan, or I think Sulu has a great underrated moment when Kirk is telling him to, like, prepare the shields, and he's just like, preparing, Captain. The way that Takei delivers it, I think, is really fun.
I love George Takei. Oh, my God, he's so good.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my.
It's probably the most they also give Chekhov to really do in any of these movies, with him getting taken over. And it does create a bit of a continuity error for the hardcore Trekkers of like, well, Chekhov wasn't on the bridge yet during the first season, yet Khan recognizes him. How do you feel about that horrible error in continuity, Kaycee?
Fuck, I don't care. Walter Koenig spun the wheel and won the I don't have to shoot with William Shatner this movie contest that they were apparently all in. He has said, that's my favorite thing about that movie. Half my scenes I didn't have to do with Shatner. And then in the next movie, Nichelle Nichols has almost no scenes with him. Then George Takei has almost no scenes with him. So I sort of kind of believe that's a thing where they just were taking, like, drawing straws on who gets to not have a scene with Shatner.
That's what they did really well with, I'd argue, 2, 3, and then a lot of 4. They gave the entire crew, even, like you said, even if it was just a snippet, to where in the later movies, 5 and 6, it basically becomes a Kirk movie with Spock as a side character. And then in the Next Generation movies, it's Picard and Data. I want to see what Bones is up to. I want to see what Scotty's up to. It's what made the show work was the crew, or at least the idea. Because I don't know, guys. Look, hot take here. Shatner's not that good of an actor. I know. Look, it's my personal opinion, not thousands upon hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people don't agree. They do agree with me, actually, 100%. But the ensemble is what makes it work. And yes, I do think in this one especially, they just swang for the fences. Like, even if it's him getting a fucking little slug in his ear, give it to him. Let him do it. Fine. Scotty being all sweaty in an NASA suit. Fine, give it to him. Let him do it. Show him.
Because that's so much more frustrating when you get to especially the Next Generation movies, is what the fuck you do with, like,
at
most
all.
of the... Well, I mean, Deanna Troi, it makes sense because she didn't have much to do on the show anyway. Until, weirdly, she's the one who has, like, a plot point in Nemesis with, like, her, technologically I'm linked to fucking Ron Perlman for some reason. But
oh my God, that's right, yeah.
But what do you give Worf to do? I'm drunk at the beginning of the movie, and that's it. What's LeVar Burton do? Nothing, except he doesn't have the visor anymore.
Doesn't Worf have a pimple in one of the movies?
Does he?
Insurrection.
Insurrection. Oh, that's right, because they're all de-aging or whatever.
Which leads to, okay, this is my new favorite line in Star Trek. Have you noticed your boobs are getting firmer?
Well, we're getting off track of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, so I guess we might want to go into our final thoughts then here. Kaycee, our guest, go ahead and go to your final thoughts on Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan.
They brought in two people who weren't part of the franchise. They went through what they wanted to do. They wanted to have Kirk getting older. They wanted to have Genesis. They wanted to have Khan, and they wanted to kill Spock. And they said, okay, let's try to blend this into a movie. A lot of this is sort of a happy accident, but it works. They were able to get those four different things to thematically match in order to make this a story about somebody getting older and the things they have to face. And it's one of my favorite movies of all time. I think the script is damn near perfect. I think the things that shouldn't work really well, like how they try to set up the next movie with the mind meld where Spock says remember, but that's not just a sequel bait, because that still pays off in this movie with when McCoy says he's really not dead as long as we remember. It works on multiple layers and multiple levels. And that's this movie in a nutshell. Everything works.
We never mentioned really the economy of the storytelling, but I really agree. There's a lot of great setup payoff throughout the whole movie. Especially I noticed this time how much of it's just like, oh, this is so perfectly like integrated, like first act, second act, third act payoff perfectly. But Adam, your final thoughts?
Look, if you have any interest in watching a Star Trek movie, but maybe one day you're like, I'll watch one to see what it's all about, then I think this is the one you got to watch. Well, it works as a standalone, and it would almost work as the only Star Trek movie. Just unfortunately, a lot of people would be like really bummed out that it ends with Spock dying, which I understand. But I agree literally with everything Kaycee said. I don't think any that have come since can eclipse it. A couple might come close, but I think this is the best one.
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree that it's definitely the best one, and it's like you mentioned, it stands alone so well that it just works as a great sort of sci-fi story that really, like we mentioned, there's not a lot of hand-to-hand combat of any sort. Kirk and Khan are never in the same space together. They're only on screens adjacent to each other. Mostly because I know they had to work around the Fantasy Island schedule for Colonel Montalban with that. And also, literally, the bridges are just redresses of each other as well, because that's how, like, cheap it was ultimately to, like, have two fucking big bridge sets. But that still works because it feels more like sort of a submarine naval movie. And that really works, where it's just like you see just these captains and their crew really are so game to like fight each other, but at the same time, what does that cost? What does that mean, especially for a man like Kirk that's aging out of it, or for Khan, who this is his last desperate attempt to try and get his vengeance that he so desires. It works so well that, you know, these universal themes really resonate even if you aren't familiar with what Vulcan technically is and all this other shit. It's a very universal story, and it's like I mentioned, it kind of is both the best Star Trek movie and also the curse that many a Star Trek movie has tried and failed to kind of grapple with. But let's go ahead then and get into our bad feature, which is Star Trek Generations.
Paramount Pictures invites you to leap into the future of adventure.
Red alert! All hands to battle stations, Captain Picard to the bridge!
Travel to the limits of time and space as the next generation of heroes takes you beyond the final frontier.
Make it quick!
Let's try and cheat death together.
Warp 1, engage!
Yes! Star Trek Generations. Special preview Thursday, November 17th. Regular engagement starts Friday, November 18th.
So, Star Trek Generations, which is obviously by its title, the first film to feature any of the Next Generation cast, came out shortly after the Next Generation series ended, and was the first of 4 of the movies in which, you know, Picard and his crew would appear. But it also has a few appearances from Kirk and a few of the other original series cast members to bridge the gap. Very literally bridge in certain places.
Oh, God.
And so, Kaycee, I'm especially curious to hear your thoughts on how it kind of does that connective tissue, given how big a fan you are of both series.
It doesn't do as well as Star Trek 6 did. That's the big thing. It's not even the best of the passing of the torch movies. It has things that are neat, but overall just kind of a mess. It struggles to give anything except 2 characters something to do. There's an entire subplot with fighting the Klingons that's only there because they want to dump these sets. It really struggles to be cinematic in a way that the other ones didn't.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of what the problem is with it. Especially, this is the first time I'd seen it in a while. I realized, I talked to the guys earlier about this off mic, that I rewatched the Next Generation movies I knew I had watched, which were this one, and I realized Insurrection upon rewatching. Like, oh, I remember this boring piece of shit movie. And then, like, to First Contact and Nemesis, those were the first time I had seen either of those. And I think what's interesting, especially with this one, is it definitely feels like it's a TV crew, which includes, like, David Carson, the director, had directed a couple episodes of the series, and also was written by, like, some of the people who had written for the show. You can tell they're kind of struggling, and I will give at least this much credit. I think they do a pretty impressive job of adding a cinematic lighting to the TV sets, because it doesn't look as, like, fluorescently lit as it did in, like, the Next Generation, from what I remembered. It definitely looks like they at least tried some cinematic stuff with the lighting, particularly the bit where Picard's looking through his photo album and sees his nephew who died in the fire. I thought that's actually a really well lit scene. Despite it's cascade and dark, there's a lot more experimental stuff that's going on there. It shows that, like, they wanted to, kind of hide the issues they had with these sets, which they were going to end up destroying by the end of the movie anyway. And the future movies do a better job of kind of, like, bringing the Next Generation into the cinematic space. But otherwise, yeah, there's a lot of... Especially when you have Malcolm McDowell and Picard talking to each other on that... What's that area in the deserts in California that they shot a bunch of Star Trek stuff at? That's clearly the same fucking rocks. I forgot what it's called, but it's that same...
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
The Bogus Journey rocks. Let's call them the Bogus Journey
That's
rocks.
Yeah. How much time is spent on just, like, Picard and Malcolm McDowell's character awkwardly walking around?
Quite a bit.
The movie fucking stops for it.
Especially because I think that's a rare case where, like, the sound mixing is so good where you can hear every individual step that you just feel time go through the hourglass. Where it's just like Malcolm McDowell has to walk from this place over to this place, and it's just like, why are we spending this much time here?
And for Malcolm McDowell's character to supposedly be this brilliant man, never once thinks that he's just trying to kill time. He's trying to stall me. Never once.
He wants to have a conversation. I've been lonely, being diabolical. Green is my favorite color, and I truly enjoy lavender in the spring.
I will give credit to, I think Malcolm McDowell's having a lot of fun with a very thin part. I think you can believe the obsession he has with the sort of ripple, what's it called? The time ripple ribbon thing?
The Nexus.
Yeah, the Nexus. Yeah, you can tell he has, the obsession he has with it, I can believe off of him. But it's weird that they, especially in the process of doing that, they make Patrick Stewart so passive in this movie. He feels like such a non-entity of a main protagonist of a character. Because of how much he's just like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. You should stop doing that thing with the rocket. And then later on, hey, William Shatner, you're a Starfleet commander. You should get your shit together. And
Wait, you got any horses we can ride?
And Kirk doesn't even, like, he comes to all the realizations about, like, you know what, this is all fake, on his own. And Picard's like, yeah, right.
They go from such an extreme medium in these movies. Like in this one, you're saying he's so, like, subdued and, like, probably shouldn't be doing this. To, like, the next movie, no! The line must be drawn here! You're like, what the fuck happened to this guy?
More dynamic screenwriting happened in that, between the movies.
And this is the one time I've ever not bought a Patrick Stewart performance. When he's crying about his dead nephew, I was like, this is really corny. Like, he is not selling these lines for me. It's weird.
Oh, and another thing, too. So the Nexus, like, gives you what you want, right? Like, you can live your fantasies or whatever.
Right.
Why is his fantasy to live in, like, 1830s England?
That is totally a Jean-Luc Picard thing. He would
It's
totally...
so weird.
Papa!
Yeah. What the fuck?
At the beginning of this movie, he has to promote one of his crew members, and his way of promoting crew member is, how about let's pretend to hang you in the 1800s?
Well, that's true. That's true.
That is
Okay,
totally... that's in character for Jean-Luc Picard to be low-key nuts about Dickensian era stuff.
I was almost waiting for one of his kids to say, Papa, I can't wait to see your production of A Christmas Carol this evening after we open our presents.
Can't find me crutches because my legs are all wonky.
Sure does suck for Picard's kids to have to watch him do a one-man play of A Christmas Carol every year.
By the time they're 17, like, Papa, we've seen this so many times. No, the line must be drawn here. You must watch this.
Especially if it's this boring ass Picard.
That's true. It's not even the level of the Hallmark production of Christmas Carol that Patrick Stewart did.
Go to town to get a goose, or don't. I don't know. Or figure it out.
Adam, I guess we didn't get a chance for you to go ahead and go a bit deeper into your overall thoughts on Star Trek Generations.
I like Malcolm McDowell in it, actually. I think this might be the last semi-decent McDowell performance in a long time. It's just so boring, dude. This movie is so boring. You don't... I mean, even the fact that in the beginning, you get Kirk, cool, and then his two officers with him are Scotty and Chekhov. Like, come on, man. Nobody else wants to be in this, so let's get the two most boring crew members we can. It's just... it's so dry and dull, and everybody's giving a weird, understated performance, except Kirk, for some reason, remembers this when he first met this girl on a fucking horse ranch in Iowa. What year are we in? Why is he cooking like a rabbit stew in a cast iron pot on a wood stove?
Now I'm convinced this isn't literally William Shatner's house that they went to shoot it in.
Well, I know it's his fucking horses. It had to be his horses.
I've seen interviews where William Shatner is being done. It's like, oh, it's Captain Kirk himself, William Shatner here, and he's just like, do you love horses? Have you ever ridden a horse? He's done a lot.
Yeah, documentary that was called The Captains, where they went and interviewed all the different people who played the captains on the Star Trek. He rode horses the whole time. You have clearly aged, two-paid, overweight Kirk having a fist fight, if you want to call it that, with Malcolm McDowell.
He was less attacked by Malcolm McDowell and more by the editor. Because those fucking fight scenes are so choppily edited.
Spoilers, but when he dies on the bridge and the bridge like falls, the way he's holding on to it, it just looks like a fun ride. Like it looks like he's having a good time. Like, that's how you kill Kirk. You have him crushed by rocks after falling off a shoddy, like Wild Wild West bridge. Oh.
You have to give him some credit. The average age of people in that fight scene is like 75.
That's true.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I agree. The Undiscovered Country, I 100% agree, should have been it. It. Done. Perfect send-off. So then they do this one, and it's almost like, well, you already know what it is. Nobody's going to want to see this without, Kirk and all them, because that's Star Trek to the average audience. People are paying to see this, not these new kids.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily that as much as, like, the selling point is, all right, it's the old school meets the new school.
Meets Picard.
Yeah. And, oh my god, the two of them are meeting
They're going to share 10 minutes of screen time, okay? Bill's going to make a soup. They're going to chop wood for a little bit. Ride a couple horses, throw a couple axe handle punches. He's going to get crushed by a bridge.
Don't forget the most important thing, which is there's a point where he's, like, fucking whisking something in a pan. It's like, oh, hey, can you hold on to this? And Picard's like, yeah, it's hot. That's like the passing of the torch in the movie is that big.
Oh, I burned my eggs. It's hot. No.
And then, and not to mention, like, we're skipping over, like, another thing where this feels so much like this is written by TV writers who don't know how to write a movie, is the whole subplot with Data getting the emotion chip. In defense, I like two specific points of that. I do like when he initially gets it at the bar, and he's trying to understand what hate is, and then he realizes, like, I hate this. That's the most I wanted to be that comedic. That works fine. And then, actually, I really like the scene where him and Picard are talking to each other, and Data can't get over his own emotions. And Picard has to, like, straighten him out on it. Those two scenes, I think, are great. Everything else is garbage with Data and the stupid fucking emotional shit.
And they did it. Didn't they do it in the next one, too? In First Contact, he had the Data, the emotion chip still, didn't he?
He has it for the rest of the movies, but in First Contact, he just has the idea of, like, hey, maybe I should turn it off for the fight. Boom, done. Like, you don't have to open him up for it. He just knows how to turn it off.
Well, it's deactivated.
She turns it back on.
Right, yeah, the Borg Queen turns it back on and uses it against him. It's a much better use of the fucking chip.
Right, that's what I was getting at. Way better idea. And then she puts the real skin on him and cuts him and it hurts him and whatever. We're getting way off track. Because, I don't know, because maybe Generations is fucking boring. Nothing happens.
The thing that baffles me with that entire subplot, it doesn't resolve, it just sort of ends.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I've had it for enough times, yeah, now I know how to control him. It's like, no, fucking show me that, guys. I mean, you know how you could have done that? You could have done that with the one scene that, fight me on this, I actually teared up a little when he found Spot, and he was just really happy that Spot had made it through the crash.
Oh, that was a good scene. That's in this one, yeah. See,
yeah.
That's how much these movies bleed together for me. And I just watched this one. I'm thinking, wait, no, Riker didn't crash the ship in this one. Yes, he fucking did. And I don't even remember.
And that's like the big action sequence of the movie is, oh my god, the ship is getting fucking crashed. It feels so much like these guys...
A ship crashes or gets blown up in every fucking movie.
Well, I mean, that's true. Yeah,
who has the funding to keep making these goddamn starships?
Well, if I'm correct, the Academy of the Future is very different.
These fucking guys, Kirk and Picard, they'd be grounded so fast after the second starship got blown up.
Because like it works so well in like a Star Trek 3, where that's a great moment in Star Trek 3, where like the ship explodes and they're just like wistfully looking like, look, there it is. She's gone. Like it's
home.
such, yeah, home. Yeah, it's wonderful. It's a great little bit of a moment. And then they successfully think like we gotta keep fucking destroying the ship. That's our big action moment. It's like not really.
Blow them shits up every movie. Fuck it.
They nearly blow it up again in First Contact. It's like, well, so much. We barely knew her. We'll get a new one, I guess.
Right? You guys have had this thing for a month. They literally all become a bunch of space hobos, just hopping the rails, basically, going from ship to ship. Can't settle in, can't do anything, so they get in a bunch of shenanigans and hijinks. They got emotions all over the place. They're going in reverse puberty. What the hell is going on in these movies?
They feel, like we said, a lot more like TV writers trying to do 100%. A movie. Especially
stretch out 40 minutes of a script into 2 hours.
Well, especially with the B plot of like Data, like that would work much more over the course, like a B plot in an hour-long episode of a show. At the same time, they still forget, like Casey mentioned, to actually resolve that subplot. I got control over it. Or then also, the way that they just keep cutting, especially from story to story with that, like, how long do we spend in that grueling, endless scene where him and LeVar Burton are, like, looking around that one derelict ship and then they get attacked by Malcolm McDowell? And they just have Brent Spiner laughing incessantly. It's endless how much he fucking laughs, and it just got to a point where I'm like, Brent Spiner, I like you so much. Stop
him. Tell him to stop. And they do it in all of these movies with him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're literally like, hey, Brent, go crazy. We'll film it. Which, look, obviously the dude loves being Data. There's no question that, that's his bread and butter. That's what made him. That's what he still is known for. Mm-hmm. And he knows and respects the character. But Data is a side character, though. He's not that fleshed out. You get the idea. He was created by a guy. He's always been an android. He's supposed to be one of a kind, yet all the time he's finding other heads and hands and shit of androids just like him. Well, that's besides the point. So then he gets the emotion chip. Okay, you got it. He's an android running the emotions. He's also super strong in technology, and you got it. Enough. I don't need to spend 45 minutes in each movie with fucking Data.
And in the process, really just pushing other people to the side. Like, this is the most I think Michael Dorn gets to do in any of these movies, with, like, the opening bit, which is fun. Like, I do like the holodeck scene at the beginning. I think that's a fun way of, like, having all the characters kind of be together, have a bit of camaraderie, and, like, the ship plank going down. That scene almost felt like it was about to go into, like, the end of, like, an 80s crass comedy, where it's just like, everyone into the water! And then just... and they start playing, like...
get laid!
Exactly, it's like the end of Caddyshack! I was hoping for that, honestly. But yeah, after this, it's just like they ignore him, and then LeVar Burton, too. Poor LeVar Burton. Like, at least he gets, like, the contacts in the later movies, as opposed to wearing the fucking big visor.
I really like Jonathan Frakes. I think Riker's good, CO. I really do. And they just really do nothing with him except make him super horny for Deanna Troi in, like, the last 3 of these movies.
And they get married to her by the end.
And talking about banging.
Yep.
That's all they want to do. Shaving. Oh, no more rug burn. Oh, good God.
And really, really creepily banging in that one scene in Nemesis. That's so just irksome. Even before Tom Hardy gets into it, that's really weird. But Kaycee, I think we're steamrolling over you a bit. Is there anything else you want to mention about specifically maybe Generations?
This is a very interesting showcase in how to adapt a TV show to a movie, because I feel like they were able to notice, here's what our problems are going to be, here's what our production design and what our costumes look like compared to what they need to look like, here's what our storytelling structure is like compared to what it needs to be like. They identify solutions to those problems, and then only get like 40% of the way there, which is not enough to solve them, but it is enough that draws attention to it. Like, did it bug you guys that they were using half and half different uniforms in this, the old TNG uniforms and then Deep Space Nine uniforms?
Yes, 100%. 100%.
Yeah, that's because they thought, oh, the TNG uniforms won't look good on the big screen, but the Deep Space Nine's ones will. But we don't have enough of those made, so we're going to give half of you them, and then half of you are going to keep the old one. So it's just there enough for me to notice, but not there enough to fix the problem. Same with, I know you were saying you really like the lighting in this, Tom. I really don't. I think it's weird to have beige set with yellow colored lighting, and it just looked pretty ugly. I was looking forward to any time they got off of the ship. There was a bit of me that was wondering, like, what would this movie be like? At the risk of being oh, they should have done it. I was wondering what it would have been like if around the end of the first act, beginning of the second act, the ship gets torn apart and they all end up in the Nexus. Because then that would give more people something to do. You can see, here's what this person does for joy, here's how they overcome it, here's how they find their friends, here's how they get out, here's how they all take on Malcolm McDowell.
Oh, that sounds like an infinitely better movie, Kaycee. Yes, thank you for rewriting that. Go back to 1990 please.
I instantly pictured them all like floating through like a big tie-dye thing, and then Inagata Davida playing as they all go to their separate things. Like,
you know, that sounds boring.
No,
it does not. No.
Yeah, maybe that's Jonathan Frakes' thing. He wants to be the lead singer of Iron Butterfly. Who the hell knows? And Picard could go back to fucking the plague times.
I would totally love to see what Data's version of Joy is. That could have been a thing that makes him understand his emotions better, and you get to see that arc happen over the course of a movie instead of just not.
But Kaycee, that's silly. We don't need that. We need more scenes of, like I said, Picard awkwardly sitting on a rock, just like, waiting. Just kicking around dirt.
Yeah, what are you doing? I know why he's doing it, but from Sauron's eyes, Picard's just sitting there skipping stones. At one part, like, I know he's throwing him to see if there's the force field in the one spot, but Sauron sees him chucking a couple of them, and he's just like, man, this guy's having a gay old time just sitting here talking to me.
Like, I don't know if it's that as much as he looks just more like, do you need, like, a crossword puzzle? You seem pretty bored down there.
Hopscotch? Do you want to play jacks? I don't know.
I have a deck of cards we could use. I know you like those.
Oh, I got an idea. I spy with my little eye something dry.
It's the desert!
It's the only thing in your line of sight.
You truly are a formidable opponent, Captain.
Oh, and then when he does get through the force field and he gets, like, onto the bridge, and it takes McDowell a couple minutes to realize he's standing right there, it's like, oh, how about that?
Oh, my favorite bit of the whole movie, though, is the bit where for some reason they have this whole contrivance of like, oh, we're gonna make the rocket invisible. We're gonna make it visible. And Picard's fucking around with it. It's like, oh, you stop fucking around with it, Picard. And then Malcolm McDowell comes up and Picard goes away from it. And then he looks down and he sees that he sabotaged it. And there's a close-up of Malcolm McDowell where he looks like he's just one fucking post-sport away from pulling up a Wile E. Coyote sign. And then he explodes. Including, they have a, like, awkward close-up right on him, and I was expecting, like, a Daffy Duck, like, mother, and then he explodes. But yeah, I think we've exhausted a lot on Generations, so let's do final thoughts real quick. Kaycee.
This movie's boring. There's things about it that are interesting. I actually do like some of the fan servicey stuff, but they're just, as a cohesive whole, it is not there. And I found myself not only not taking notes, I was just fidgeting uncomfortably, just waiting for the movie to keep going. Because apparently in the 1990s, whenever you go down to a desert planet, your movie just fucking stops. and just will not pick back up again for like 45 minutes.
I want another example of that. What's another one?
Phantom Menace.
Oh, God. Yeah. 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 The sand. I don't like it. Gets everywhere.
That's getting into Attack of the Clones, but keep going.
I will give this movie one bit of credit. I think the effects on the spaceships are actually really good. They're very Independence Day-esque, which even though I hate that movie, I really like its models and computer compositing combination. I think that they work really well, and I think it looked really well here. I really liked the shot of the exterior of the saucer just crashing against the ground. That's like one of the only things I like about that.
Adam?
I think I've already said way too much about this movie. It's long. It's boring. There's shit in it that is just fucking, come on. Just, you know what? I mean, come on. That's what I got to say about this movie. Come on. Enough. Just stop.
The line must be drawn here.
The line must be drawn here.
Yeah, I mean, I do somewhat agree. I think I might be the most positive on the movie, because what I meant with more of the lighting is I think it's a more curious thing of, like, sort of experimenting they're trying to do with these sets. They're trying to work around it. And I think it results in some interestingly lighting. I don't know if it's the best lighting, but I think it's, you can tell, like you were mentioning, Casey, these are, like, TV directors and writers trying to work around how to, like, adapt these characters cinematically. And then especially when I was rewatching the other ones, the only one that ever got it quite right was First Contact, because they also had the benefit of, like, a much better story, a lot of better, like, fun actors that are going around. That whole time travel plot really works, and the Borg are a much better villain. Also, James Cromwell drunkenly dancing needs to be in every movie.
Alice Krieg in that movie just fucking kills it.
No, she sells me on a concept I don't like. It's brilliant.
Yes, that's true. I think that all really works well. As opposed to Generations, which doesn't. It's not the worst one. Insurrection definitely I think is worse. I'd even argue Nemesis is worse, despite a Tom Hardy trying his best. That movie also, I think, because that one has more of the problem of trying to be a Wrath of Khan. This one kind of has that, but also it's just like, hey, let's try and fit in a bunch of other weird ideas that I at least would say it's ambitious to a certain extent. If not, like I said, it's just the moment you have Picard being so passive, and you just especially have Kirk kind of just taking on, it feels definitely like some influence of the Star kind of coming in and destroying things a bit with Kirk. Like, you can tell Shatner had a lot of notes about, like, what he wanted to do and when he wanted to be there. And then just that ultimate finale for his character, it's such a weak sauce way of sending him off, way more compared to, I agree, Undiscovered Country is very underrated. But yeah, that is our discussion on the two films, but we did have some feedback. We asked all of you out there on the Double Edge Double Bill Facebook page and Twitter page, which is @TEDBpod, about what your least favorite Star Trek movies were. And first off, Dan Chambos says Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home is underrated.
I don't know that it's underrated. I think people like it. I just don't think it's... I think it's exactly talked about as much as it should be.
It's a perfect movie. We should talk about more. Y'all should have seen the face of 15-year-old me when I was on vacation in California, and we went to an aquarium, and I realized, oh my god, this was the aquarium where they shot Star Trek 4.
Well, we all don't have that specific memory in our heads.
We loved the movie. I loved the movie before that, and you should have that memory. Do that.
You're right. Okay, you know what? I'm going to get on that.
You know, they've said as much that 2, 3, and 4 are sort of the unofficial trilogy that really works together, and I would agree with that. I think it's a solid streamlined kind of thing there, and plus it has Scotty talking to a mouse saying computer. That's great.
Keyboard. How quaint.
Yeah, that was funny. Yeah.
Yes. Brian Kane says, Motion Picture and Beyond are probably my favorites, the latter being a massive breath of fresh air. I'd say all the Next Generation movies are big, dumb, and unrepresentative of the series, with perhaps First Contact being the exception. You know what? I do think Beyond is underrated. I think Beyond deserves a lot more credit for, like, I think it did the best balance of, like, the big over-the-topness of the Kelvin timeline, while at the same time sticking to the roots of the original series, and more importantly, giving all the characters something to do at the same time.
Idris Elba, I thought that was such a boring villain.
I mean, it suffers the Khan problem again.
Yeah,
I'm not disagreeing.
And to get someone like that, you know, of his caliber too, you're like, oh, damn it. But other than that, I thought it was good. I don't couldn't get behind the villain. But other than that, the movie I liked it.
This is coming out not too long after Paramount announced they're going to stick way more with the TV side of Star Trek and put the movies on hold. And they're not going to do that weird sort of like Chris Hemsworth comes back as Kirk's father thing they were kind of rumored to do. And also that weird...
Thank God.
And then that weird Quentin Tarantino script, apparently, for Star Trek that was going around.
Oh, I thought that was still going.
I don't know, because that's the thing. They seem kind of nebulous about the future of it cinematically, and are sticking more to like the TV stuff that they're doing with
that's probably for the best.
With Discovery, and then also the Picard show that might take place in that same Kelvin timeline. It's weird. I'm not sure, but Casey, are you for or against that?
I want them to spread Star Trek out again. Because for a while in the 1990s, there was Star Trek all over the place. There were the movies going on, then there was Voyager and Deep Space Nine, there were comics, there were books, there were conventions. And now just we had the movies for a little bit, and then once Kelvin happened, we're now going through a lot of the same time periods again. The last bit of like chronology in the Star Trek universe we saw was Nemesis. We have not gone further into the future than that, and I want to see more of that. Let's go into the 25th century. Let's do shit there. Let's go to Andromeda. Let's go forward into the future again. Instead of just going back through the original series era, and now apparently I'm really hoping the Patrick Stewart show is the original timeline 25 years later.
I agree with you. And you know what, Casey? I think they should have the balls to just do a new movie, a continuation with an entire new cast, entire new crew. Not pre-existing characters, not anything, just set it in the Star Trek universe. I think it could work.
I would like to see them do that, perhaps even on a non-Starfleet ship, or like maybe you get a Starfleet captain who retires, and then they get their own freighter, and
right,
then they just
that could be. But then you're kind of maybe getting into a little bit of Star Wars territory where they could really take it that route. I think the reason there's such the difference between Star Trek and Star Wars is obviously Star Trek's more of the procedural military sort of idea, the more exploration, and I'd like to see it stay at that. With those roots, I think that's what makes it a smarter maybe idea than Star Wars. I'm not saying better, but smarter.
And I wish they would kind of do what you're talking about with like a completely new crew, but you can sort of take I think the best thing that the Star Trek 2009 movie did really was have that sort of the better version of passing the torch of having old Spock come in. In that case, I think Picard would be a perfect character to do that with. And Patrick Stewart's like the right age to where you could do that. You already fucking kind of did it with X-Men, too.
Yeah, that's true.
In X-Men Origins Wolverine, I remember that.
Yes, everyone's favorite of all those movies.
Yep.
Yes. No disputing that. And then Andrew Lorenz says, best for me would have to be First Contact. Is there any debate about 5 being the worst?
Yes.
Yes.
Insurrection's the worst.
No, let me rephrase that. There's no debate because it's not the worst.
Right. There you go. 5 is the worst out of the original 6.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say that.
I'll probably watch it before I watch the motion picture, though.
Yeah, I probably would too.
And also, I think it does work in segments. Like, I really like the first 30 minutes where you're just seeing them all hanging out and camping together. There's no plot going on. It's really dumb, but it's fun.
You almost would want like a Robert Altman Star Trek movie.
Yeah.
It's just all them chilling out.
Yes. Robert Altman's Nashville, but Nashville of like the 23rd century. Yeah.
Where it's just called Star Trek Romulan. They're just all hanging out on Romulan. And they're all singing songs. Sure. Why not? Honestly,
it's called Romulus, you fake nerd girl.
Oh, that's true. It's almost as if I specifically mentioned I wasn't the hugest Star Trek person at the beginning of the show. And then Nate Thomas finishes out her feedback by saying, my favorites, Wrath of Khan, Voyage Home, First Contact, least 5, 1, Insurrection, underrated, Undiscovered Country, and Nemesis.
I agree with one of those.
I actually agree with the entire list.
Now, what do you like about Nemesis besides Tom Hardy, Adam?
I like the whole look of the movie. I like the costuming. I like the set design. I like the way it's shot. I really like the opening. I think it opens real strong. Whether or not it carries that on, probably not. But I think, even though he said besides Tom Hardy, but I do think he's a compelling enough villain. I think it's better than Insurrection, hands down. I think it's better than Generations, hands down. First Contact's way better. But I think it's an entertaining movie. I think it's, if anything, it's nice to look at. No, I think it's decent. I understand it's weak, and I understand it's got problems, but I think there's enough there to make it easily watchable. I never feel bored watching it like I do with Generations or Insurrection.
But we want to thank you all for your feedback. We also want to thank Chris Oliver for the music used in our show. You listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Emily Scarda for the art used on our show. She accepts commissions at fiverr.com/EE-Scarda. We also do want to thank, of course, our guest, Kaycee Jarrard. Kaycee, where can we find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at the Kacer. That's THE_KACER. And that's it. I'm not allowed anywhere else online anymore since the incident.
Yes, the various incidents that have taken place.
All of the incidents covered in the NDAs.
And you can find us on Twitter at DEDBpod or at double-edged-double-bill, all spelled out, is our email, where you can send that. Follow myself as well. I'm on at Not The Who's Tommy on Twitter, where you can find my musings. And you can also follow my writing. I'm at marianithomas.wordpress.com. And you can find Adam in the Nexus talking to his dear children who call him Papa.
Oh, I've gone and wet myself.
That's just Adam talking. And we also encourage you to subscribe to us on iTunes, rate and review the show. So yes, now it is the end of our show, and it is time to do our picking for next week. For those of you who don't know, at the end of every episode, Adam and I will pick the good and bad features for our upcoming episode. We each have 2 movies that the other doesn't know about beyond our topic, and we both assign the numbers between 1 and 10. Usually would each guess a number between 1 and 10 in order to get the good and bad feature for the next episode. But when we have a guest like Kaycee here, he will end up doing that picking of number between 1 and 10. And our topic for next week, we decided to do something different because it's kind of a slow January week. And this is a topic we've mulled over doing for a while. As subjective as our usual stuff is, this may be the most subjective subject we've ever done. The topic is overrated and underrated films. And this is all based on Adam and I's own perceptions of, in my case, I have the 2 underrated movies, and Adam has the 2 overrated movies.
Yes, I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, it gives us more of
actually.
It gives us more of a interesting perspective on each other. But for my 2 good or underrated films, Kaycee, number between 1 and 10.
1.5.
Okay, we haven't done halves before. That's interesting. But that is closest to the number 3 pick I had, which is also going to be the oldest movie we've ever covered on the show by this point. A movie starring Robert Mitchum called Night of the Hunter.
Oh my God.
Yes!
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, I love that movie so much.
It's a recent discovery for me, and it was interesting. The moment I watched it, back when Filmstruck was a thing, I immediately bought the Criterion Edition Blu-ray, because I'm like...
As you should.
This is amazing, and I can't wait to go into that and expose more people to it. Though I do also love, at number 6, it's a lot more of a silly pick, but it's one that I have championed many a time, and would love to talk about further in perhaps a future episode. Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox Story. I think it's a supremely underrated comedy. One of my favorites.
I love both those picks.
I'm a man on that.
We're definitely talking about that so I can fucking school you on this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, please. Teach.
Yes. But now, Kaycee, for Adam's 2 bad picks, number between 1 and 10.
9.99.
Oh, at number 10, I have the James Cameron epic Avatar.
Oh, boy. I haven't seen that in a while. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, that says a lot.
I refuse to believe that movie was ever released on DVD. There's no evidence of it.
Number 2, I had Scarface with Pacino.
I think both of those movies are overrated, so good job.
Hey, man, that's the whole point. To get you on board.
I think at last we understand each other, Frodo Baggins.
Yes, we've all come together in the spirit of the Federation to be united, for sure, on that. But thank you, Kaycee, for doing those picks, and we thank all of you for listening, and until next time, beam us up. Great sound work. Kaycee's our sound engineer. Excellent.
It should be noted I've been wearing Boba Fett socks the whole time.
Traitor.
Yep.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.